Allah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Who is an extremist? An extremist person is the one who has accepted a narrative, um, probably because he's influenced by some individual or an environment, and without giving it a complete thought, properly understanding it, he becomes emotionally charged about it. Um, if somebody disagrees with that narrative, um, the person reacts and goes to the extremes to condemn somebody who is disagreeing with him. We find examples of extremists all over the world. I'm more concerned about the Muslim extremists. How do they come about? What makes a person an extremist? You see, if you want to learn anything, but in our case, if you are to learn religion, there are two ways of doing it. One is through what is called indoctrination, brainwashing. You are taught in an atmosphere environment which is secluded, at least secluded from the point of view of other narratives. There is an individual or a few individuals who are highly respected, or shall I call feared, and they're impressive people. They're impressive because of the way they speak. They're impressive because of their reputation. They're impressive because of the reputation of their piety and their research scholarship. And the end result is that uh, the passive receiver is in awe and is accepting everything that is given to him or her. Um, the understanding creates an emotional attachment, immediate emotional attachment with the narrative. In fact, it's presented emotionally, and therefore that's how it's received. Uh, the person who accepts the narrative, which is based on extremism, feels very insecure from within and therefore is not prepared to let it go. He or she thinks that that's the ultimate understanding that the person has got, and therefore there's no way that the person can part with it. And if somebody questions or comes up with a parallel point of view or something different, uh, that person is insulted and accused. So that's how an extremist is made. The other way of learning anything, any narrative, particularly religion, is to understand it critically, to think critically, and to find out which of the different views is more correct. In the first case, it's only one narrative that is presented. If any other narrative is presented, it's presented only for the purpose of condemning. And those who are receiving it are the ones who are informed that these other points of view narratives are incorrect. But in the second case, it's a critical examination based on the strength of the arguments that are supporting those narratives. One decides which one seems to be more correct. And it's always a case of deciding that it's more correct, not that it's absolutely correct to the exclusion, complete exclusion of all others. The person who adopts a certain point of view in the second case is quietly confident from inside, um, because he knows that he's understood and is always prepared to review, and is allowing others to argue. Uh, so when such a person discusses matters with others, looks at the questions of others, even criticism, may they be very harsh and strong, the person is sympathetic because he himself has been not very clear about certain things, and then later on contemplation, on reflection, on discussion, on research, he comes to find out what the answers are, and therefore whoever is critical of his point of view is sympathetic. In the first case, there's no chance of sympathy because it's a one-sided affair and it's indoctrination. But it also depends on how you have come close to your religion. I mean, what led you to religion? Uh, in one case, in the case of the extremist, is normally an individual, a charismatic personality who has influenced you, or there is a group of people who've influenced you, and you accept a point of view and you hear about it over and over again, and nothing else. If whatever else is listened to is for the purpose of condemnation. Uh, in the second case, it's not normally quite as much a personality or a group of people. It's actually a search for the right answer and answers to the puzzle of life. Life is a puzzle, really throws at you a number of questions. Who created us? Why did he create us? How can we explain this whole world? It's a complex world. So the puzzle gets solved, and the person who has accepted a certain religious narrative comes close to that narrative. But as I said earlier, the person is always open, because the idea is to solve the puzzle more and more convincingly, to the satisfaction of one's mind and heart. In the first case, it's the satisfaction of one's, emotions, and allow me to say ego, that a certain point of view is adopted and then is consistently followed, adhered to. Uh, so if you are not an extremist and you've solved the puzzle of life yourself to some extent, you would be eager for others to also solve it. And therefore, you will be eager to share your views on the basis of your arguments with others. And you would also listen to others attentively. In the first case, in the case of extremists, there is no chance that an honest, sympathetic hearing is taking place when a discussion is taking place with somebody who has a different point of view. Uh, it also depends on how the Quran is read. An extremist would read the Quran differently from a person who is not an extremist. An extremist would read the Quran only to confirm his views. He invariably acquires his views from outside the Quran, even if he is under this false impression that he's understood it from the Quran, because somebody was teaching him the Quran, and he felt that the Quran is saying what his teacher is saying. But each time he's going to read the Quran, he'll look for the same views getting more and more confirmed. Any verses that seem to be saying something different from his narrative, he'll either ignore it or would confuse him. And he's not going to be bothered by confusion. He probably would think that this is a trial of life. It's a trial of the Almighty. So we've got to live with it. On the other hand, a person who has understood a narrative on the basis of his open-minded reflection would always read the Quran with tadabbur, deep reflection, critically examining his own view, trying to look for what the Quran is saying. And each time a reading is done of the Quran, the idea is to know more and more of what the truth is, with complete disregard of what the present understanding is, because it has to be a complete surrender to the Quran with the intellect completely open and actively engaged in understanding the Quran. I can assure you that if the Quran is read in that manner, even a very rigid extremist Muslim would become non-extremist and open-minded. Allow the Quran to influence you and then see what happens. May the Almighty enable us to understand the Quran properly and enable us to be influenced by the Quran.